Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 mod roundup. Hope you're all doing well. Recently, there was a massive new addition of mods as compatible on consoles and Macs, and having had a chance to play with and test them, I wanted to highlight 10 of my favorites. I think it is awesome that Larian continues to support modding so well, and continues to support modding for console. Mods having to go through a console approval process means that a lot of games simply don't allow mods to work on consoles at all. So I think it's incredible that Baldur's Gate 3 does, and I really want to highlight the mods that are available for everybody, especially with the upcoming crossplay update. If you haven't seen that, check out my video on the DLC announcement, when we are going to be able to play cross platform with our friends who are on different platforms. It's going to be awesome that they will be able to use these mods as well, and you can have modded playthroughs even if you're on PC and your friend is on console, or vice versa, or you have players on Macs and consoles and PCs all mixed together. That will just be incredible. So I want to talk about 10 of my favorite new mods, or mods that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet. I've focused on mods that will significantly change your playthrough or add something that I think is missing from vanilla Baldur's Gate 3. So if you are on, if you've played through the game quite a bit already, then these mods should add something new and interesting for you to take a look at, because of how much content they add or how they change your playthrough. So that's what we're focusing on. Let's get to the mods. I'm not doing these in any particular order, but I'm going to start with the most impactful new mod, Tactician Enhanced, by Pixelbytes. Tactician Enhanced is a difficulty mod, and that's something that was previously missing from consoles, so if you want to make your playthrough more challenging, Tactician Enhanced works. Despite the name, it works on any difficulty setting, so you can use it combined with custom difficulty settings in honor mode or on lower difficulty settings if you want to use the difficulty features from this mod combined with some of the settings on lower difficulties as well. But mostly this is of course for very experienced players who want more of a challenge. At time of recording, this mod has 3 major features, allowing you to increase enemy hit points, enemy actions per turn, and enemy bonus actions per turn, and you can do so in a very customizable way. This mod is all configurable using in-game menus, which I think is very cool, and you can customize it based on the number of characters in your party. It works very well with the Remove Party Limits mod. If you want to have more than 4 characters in your active party, Tactician Enhanced can help even the odds back up again for the enemies. And also gives you a lot of control over which types of enemies get the buffs and whether or not they're getting additional bonus actions and so on. There's also presets for if you don't want to dive deep into the configuration yourself, and the fact that this is all configurable through in-game menus I think is very cool. Now, obviously, increased difficulty is going to appeal to some players and not to others, and that's totally fine, but if you're looking for an increase to the challenge in Baldur's Gate because you have been using my builds and have optimized the game to the point where a lot of the fights are much easier than you would like, then Tactician Enhanced can add some challenge back into the game. I will say that because the current iteration of the mod, which they've said they're going to add more ways to increase the difficulty, so this may be different if you're watching this in a couple weeks or months, the way that the mod currently increases difficulty with increased hit points, actions, and bonus actions means that enemies are much better at hurting your party members, and are much better at living through Alpha Strike damage, which is good, because that's sort of the dominant strategy in Baldur's Gate 3, is just overwhelming damage in the first turn of combat to kill enemies before they can act. But it does, rather than entirely increase the difficulty of the game, it shifts a lot of the power of strategies to control spells and to preventing enemies from doing things. Now, I think that this is a more compelling tactical experience overall, because you have to figure out ways to stop these very dangerous enemies from getting to you. You can no longer kite enemies backwards as easily when they have additional actions and stuff, and you won't be able to just one-shot a lot of enemies. But I would like to see increased saving throws, other ways that more enemies could have, like legendary resistances and stuff, other ways to increase the difficulty added to the mod, which the mod author has said that they will do. I think that Tactician Enhanced is an awesome addition to the game. It's a super fun mod that really adds a another layer of challenge to Baldur's Gate 3. When enemies have extra actions, every enemy is super dangerous. Obviously, actions are the most important resource in the game. And every enemy becomes incredibly dangerous if you give them additional actions, making you have to think about even fights that were previously quite trivial. And the increased hit points as well help to mitigate some of the more dominant first strike strategies from being just as good as they normally are in Baldur's Gate. So I think this is a great start. I'm really looking forward to this mod being expanded even further with more increased difficulty options, but also just the fact that console players now have a way to increase the difficulty of the game, which is something that was previously missing, I think is incredible. So if you only use one mod from this list, this is the one I would check out first to give yourself even more of a challenge. Next up, the Mindweaver class by ZX10RX. This is a class mod that adds an entirely new class to the game, along with its associated subclasses. So it's a ton of new content, because there's actually 5 subclasses that this mod has, and a 6th planned to be added, which is an enormous amount of additional content for a single mod, obviously. This is an entirely homebrew class. Everything about this is made up by the mod author. It's not from like tabletop rules or anything like that. And it has custom spells, custom abilities, and a bunch of cool other effects that have all been added to the game specifically for this class. The Mindweaver is a hybrid melee character or combat character and spellcaster, and focuses on psionic powers. In the mod author's own words, they wanted to fill a gap that exists in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. There just aren't a lot of hybrid characters that do both spellcasting and combat effectively, and there are not a lot of psionic characters in the game, and the Mindweaver is intended to fill that role. I really like this because I'm always interested in classes that fill an interesting role or party niche that does not get filled in base Dungeons & Dragons, or gives you an option that isn't extant in Baldur's Gate 3 already, and the Mindweaver does a very good job of that. I will say that as a fully homebrew class, there are some balance concerns that I have with the Mindweaver. I think that it is a little bit on the more powerful side. I think that the mod author was not always able to resist the temptation of giving every ability really good numbers. So this is definitely a class that's on the more powerful side. Maybe one to use in combination with Tactician Enhanced. I don't think it's wildly out of scale for balance or anything. It's not Sword Bard, for example. But definitely it's on the stronger end. And for homebrew content, my personal preference is to keep things slightly on the weaker end, because it's so easy for things to just get way out of hand when you're making up your own mechanics. The Mindweaver is very cool though, and gives you a ton of new cool options, a ton of new abilities and stuff that have mechanics that don't exist in Baldur's Gate already, or have interesting effects using the Baldur's Gate 3 mechanics. And so I think it's a very cool mod, very cool class addition, and having a new fully featured character class is always really cool. There are not that many of those, and so just having another class mod is awesome in and of itself, and I think this is also a very good one. I definitely recommend trying out the Mindweaver, messing around with the different subclasses, because they all have a bunch of cool and interesting effects, and the upcoming Frost-themed subclass is also cool. Again, as the mod author says, there's not a lot of Frost-themed characters in Baldur's Gate 3, but that's a powerful archetype in fantasy games that it would be nice to see fit more. So I'm excited for that. And the mod, as it currently stands, also is just a ton of content to explore, and a really cool addition to any party. Next up, we actually have a series of mods, More Beards 1, 2, and 3. I honestly feel like the facial hair options in vanilla Baldur's Gate 3 are a little bit thin on the ground and thin on the face, because there are not a lot of full beard options, and also just not as many as I would like to be able to design all of the cool custom characters that you would want. This More Beards mod by Eleanor Roche adds a ton of additional beard options. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that name, by the way. Sorry about that. Adds a ton more options for facial hair, including a ton of full beards. As a bearded man myself, this is very important to me, and if you are looking to design a bunch of new characters, then I think this adds a ton of new options. I also really like that in More Beards 3, there's options for beards that have built-in cigars or built-in pipes. I think that is just very, very funny. But obviously this is a cosmetic mod, but cosmetic mod that I think actually does address a content gap in base vanilla Baldur's Gate 3. The Celestial Warlock subclass by Nihilus. This mod is very cool for a couple of reasons. So there's actually multiple Celestial Warlock mods available on console. I'm looking at this one in particular because I think it's the more complete of the two, and I also really like the way that the mod author has structured the description of this mod. Celestial Warlock is a real subclass from Dungeons & Dragons. It's from the Xanathar's Guide to Everything book, where a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 subclasses are from. A lot of the third subclasses that they added to classes that weren't from the core player's handbook are from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. And so it actually is interesting that they've decided not to include Celestial Warlock in the upcoming subclass update. Celestial Warlocks are, of course, warlocks who are bound to some kind of celestial being, and so have cleric-ish themed powers as a result of that. And this is a class from 5th edition tabletop, so it's balanced for use in Dungeons & Dragons and in Baldur's Gate 3, which means that it should slot into BG3 pretty seamlessly. One thing I really like about how the author has presented this mod is they have included this little guide in their mod description as to how faithful they were able to make these abilities to the tabletop version of the mod. Whether this is something that's just directly ported from tabletop, whether they had to make minor adjustments in order to accommodate restrictions or the way that Baldur's Gate 3 works, or whether there are things that they have changed in order to keep to the spirit of the class because they weren't able to port it literally. I think that's a really cool guide if you care about the subclass working the way that it does in tabletop and want to actually use the subclass from tabletop. And it also gives you a good idea of whether the ability is likely to be balanced. Because while obviously tabletop D&D does have balance issues of its own, you can at least be there is at least the likelihood that those abilities were tested, which isn't always the case with every mod. So it's awesome to see when you can know that this is something directly from the game. I love this class mod because it gives you an extra option for your warlocks, and one that gives you a sort of more supporting warlock, which is something that is missing, I think, from Baldur's Gate 3. So it's really fun to actually play with. But I also really love this mod because I love the format of the description. I'm a sucker for a good, a well-formatted presentation. And so I also want to give a shout out to the mod author for that. This Warlock is for if you are looking for a more healing-focused party or something like that, then the Celestial Warlock is worth checking out, and just adds another cool option to your party, so definitely worth a look. Next up, another grouping of mods, Ember's Lute, and the Haunted Instruments expansion pack for the Ember's Lute mod. This is an awesome mod. I think it's my favorite of the mods that we're going to talk about today because it fills a gap in Baldur's Gate 3. I've actually said this like in the comment section of some videos and stuff. I've mentioned it a few times, but I think that one of the few areas in which I would say that Baldur's Gate 3 is really lacking, they really sort of dropped the ball, is the complete lack of magical instruments. There's an instrument slot in your inventory, and so it's weird that we never get to do anything cool with that. Ember's Lute, the mod, fixes that problem by adding magical instruments, and does so in a really awesome way that really goes above and beyond. If I was making this mod, I probably would have just added a couple spells and passive effects to instruments and called it a day. But this mod author not only did that, but also added custom performances, visual effects, additional sound, additional audio effects to these new instruments that also provide you with mechanical benefits when you use them in combat. The Haunted Instruments mod is even cooler than that because you can play the music in combat for effects that get stronger every turn, which of course is very thematic for musical instruments and for a combat performance. And this mod has a bunch of awesome effects on the instruments. There's one that makes wild magic happen all of the time if you play a certain song. There's one that gives your allies a bonus to their charisma with an improved counter charm ability. Just a really cool and thematic mod for bards, especially if you feel like this is a type of equipment that was missing from Baldur's Gate 3, which it was, and really want to see that addition made. You also don't have to be a bard to make use of these effects. Some of the musical instruments, I think, are better used by bards, but most of them work whether or not you have musical instrument proficiency, because the instrument themselves give you instrument proficiency, so any character can make use of these. I will say that the effects are not always balanced. Obviously, this is adding a powerful magical effect to an item slot that wasn't supposed to have a powerful magical effect on it, so it makes all of your characters and your party more powerful, and some of the effects are not at all balanced. But this is a very cool mod that adds something that I think was missing in a kind of noticeable gap in Baldur's Gate 3. My first playthrough, I was really on the hunt for magical instruments. That was something I was really expecting to find at some point, because there's a whole inventory slot for instruments, and it's weird that they didn't do anything with them. So I think it is incredible that Ariafel, the mod author here, has fixed that gap and done something really awesome with that missing content, and basically replaced it in a way I think could have just gone straight into the game. Really love this mod and think they did a great job. Highly recommend checking it out. Next up, the Godslayer. This class mod adds an entire new class and its associated 3 subclasses to the game, and this is a tank-focused class, which is something that's kind of missing from Dungeons & Dragons in general. This class is all about survivability and keeping your party alive, and I think that's a really cool niche for a character to have, so it adds yet another new way that you can play the game. I admit I was somewhat put off by the name of the character class at first. The Godslayer to me really sounds like the type of homebrew that you find on D&D Wiki, where the character does 1 billion d6 of damage with a single attack and stuff like that, and where the Mary Sue nature of homebrew content really comes to the fore. But I actually found that this class, despite the name, is pretty restrained when it comes to balance. Some of the numbers are a little bit on the higher side, but because this character is so heavily defensively focused, it actually plays out pretty well that the numbers are pretty high, because a defensively focused character can just have more powerful abilities than an offensively focused one before the balance becomes a problem. The Godslayer, I think, is very cool in that it manages to walk a neat balance where it has very good numbers on a lot of its abilities, but still feels pretty balanced because those abilities are defensive in nature. It makes for a great honor mode run as well. It's a very safe character to play through honor mode, similar to a barbarian. It's sort of a cross between a paladin and a barbarian in actual play, the way it plays out, with a little bit of ranger sprinkled in. And I think that that's just a pretty fun character to play. You also get to use attributes that don't normally get used. You use your strength for armor class on the character, depending on your subclass and stuff like that, which is just a pretty cool way to play around with the mechanics of Dungeons & Dragons. The Godslayer is a really fun addition as a class. It offers a niche that does not see play normally in the game, has multiple subclasses. I'm always looking for these complete class mods because I think they're just very cool and add a ton of new optionality to the game. And the Godslayer does that very, very well, in my opinion. Definitely recommend checking this one out and integrating it into a party. The Dread Overlord Warlock. This is actually an older mod that I talked about when I did my initial roundup of every mod that launched in the first drop, but it's one that I hadn't had a chance to play with a lot, so I wanted to do a deeper dive into this subclass because it's by far the most fully featured subclass mod out there. It has a ton of content, including unique spells for the subclass, unique special abilities for the subclass, a whole quest line and associated unique items and gear. So if you're looking for a maximal experience where you get to just play a warlock, but with a ton of additional content, then the Dread Overlord is very cool. It's a melee-focused subclass, similar to Pact of the Blade, where you are a melee warlock with a lot of extra abilities that supplement that, and you have damage shields and stuff. There's also an undead summoning sub-theme and use of corpses as a resource, which is something that we're going to see brought more into the game when the Death Cleric launches in January, apparently. So a little preview of some upcoming official content exists in this mod. I think that this is very cool because this subclass has an associated character quest, an associated item set, a whole ton of custom content, including animations and effects and everything. And to me, it's awesome that so much effort and content has gone into this subclass. I will say that the mod author says this, that a lot of work has gone into making this subclass balanced, and I think maybe a little more work could go into making the subclass balanced, because it's definitely on the high power end. I mean, you're just getting so much stuff from a subclass, which is something that normally does not give you, dozens and dozens of abilities, that you are always going to be a little bit over power curve when you're playing the Dread Overlord. So another one to use with a difficulty mod or something like that. But the Dread Overlord is awesome. I love how much stuff this gives you in a single subclass mod, how much it feels like a real addition to the game as a result, and also just how cool the abilities are and how thematic they are with the theming of the Dread Overlord Warlock. This is a bit of an older one, but I do think that it is very much worth checking out. I mean, just look at the visuals here. They're just so cool, and will really make you feel awesome. Definitely check out the Dread Overlord. Next up, Eldritch Blast Enhanced by John Axor. This is a very simple mod that just wildly increases the damage of Eldritch Blast. It increases it from a d10 per beam to 2d8 plus your charisma per beam, and gives you additional beams at 4, 7, and 10 instead of just at 5 and 10, so you get extra beams. I'm not normally a huge fan of mods that just wildly increase the damage of a spell or effect. I think they tend to unbalance the game. But the reason I think Eldritch Blast Enhanced is worth looking at is that in Baldur's Gate 3, the Potent Robe exists. The Potent Robe is basically mandatory for any character that's going to be using Eldritch Blast, because it adds your charisma to your Eldritch Blast damage again, making Eldritch Blast incredibly powerful. And that might, in my opinion, reduces the level of customization and interest that you get with Warlock gear, because there's just so far and away a best in slot item for your chest slot, that you just don't really get a chance to play around with other items because there's one that's so much better than the others. Eldritch Blast Enhanced can just replace the Potent Robe if you're in a Dark Urge playthrough where you didn't get the Potent Robe, for example, or if you just want to try out different kinds of armor, especially if you're using one of the mods that adds a bunch of new items, then you probably don't want to be stuck using the same item over and over again. Then this mod can replace that. My recommendation for this mod is don't install it until Act 2, and take it on a character that doesn't take Agonizing Blast, because then the damage of Eldritch Blast Enhanced will be very similar to the Eldritch Blast damage that you'd get with Agonizing Blast and the Potent Robe, and this way you can explore more different Eldritch invocations, another way where Warlock builds are heavily constrained, because Warlocks will 100% of the time take Agonizing Blast, and so this just gives you a little bit more leeway to customize your character, where you can actually use the other Eldritch invocations and where you can actually use other gear. Honestly, I would like to see a mod that's just you get the Potent Robe effect all the time. The Eldritch, rather than sort of arriving at that with a slightly hacky solution the way that this does. Obviously, you can also use this mod as intended by the mod author, just to wildly increase the damage of Eldritch Blast if you just want to run around lasering things. For my personal tastes, I think that I would prefer a mod that just made the Potent Robe effect baked in, so it didn't feel quite so mandatory as equipment, but this does a very good impression of that, especially if you install it at Act 2, and also it's just a fun option if you just want to run around lasering things to death. Next up, another mod that does something cool with an item slot that's sort of underused in vanilla Baldur's Gate 3, FearTaylor's Camp Clothes by FearTaylor. This not only adds a ton of new camp clothing options to the game, it also gives the camp clothing slot minor cantrips and bonus skill effects. I think not only is this very, very cool because it adds a magical effect to an item that doesn't have one and makes them mechanically interesting which camp clothes you're wearing, as well as just visually interesting. But also, the fact that these are cantrips and like a +1 to one of your skills, I think is a really cool way to do a magical effect on clothing, because it should be a minor benefit. You still don't feel bad if you just wear the one that you want to look the way you want. You know, if you just wear your camp clothing for the appearance, you're not going to feel like you're missing out on a huge amount of power or anything along those lines. But it does give a fun, cool little bonus to an item slot that otherwise doesn't have it. I'm always here for mods that just add cool little effects to the game, as well as tons and tons of more cosmetic options with the vast array of camp clothing that this makes available. You can use a lot of the clothing and outfit options that are available to NPCs as well. But the real thing that makes this mod neat, I think, is that it gives you these little magical effects added to your camp clothing so that you have an item slot that previously didn't do anything, do something pretty cool. Yeah, I think that this mod is just fun because of how many different clothing options it has, and I like the implementation of the minor little effect. And finally, one of my absolute favorite utility mods, Show Camp Night Notification. So this gives you a little floating exclamation mark over your main character's head if you have an upcoming event that will be triggered by going to camp or by resting. Similar to how the companions will get exclamations over their head if they have a new dialogue option or something that they want to talk to you about. This will show you that you have an event, so you need to go rest to trigger it. A lot of events in Baldur's Gate 3 trigger off of going to camp or resting, and sometimes it can be hard to keep track of when those are about to happen and which ones you need to go do, and this just makes that obvious and lets you do that. So especially if this is one of your earlier playthroughs, you haven't memorized when everything happens in the game, but also just for players who don't want to have to mentally keep track of which events are going to trigger when, this is super helpful. Alright, my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this look at 10 awesome mods in the Baldur's Gate 3 Mod Manager, all of these available on console as well as on PC and Mac. And I hope that it gave you some ideas for your next playthrough or something that you want to add. I think checking out these new class mods can really add depth to replays and stuff like that. And also, of course, a ton of these mods add wildly game-changing effects like Tactician Enhanced that can really help amp up the difficulty of the game to the point where you have to think quite differently strategically, which can be very fun for later playthroughs of Baldur's Gate 3. As always, of course, if you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit the like button. Helps me out a ton with the algorithm, so I appreciate you taking the time to do so. If you think there's a mod that I should feature on one of these videos, definitely let me know in the comments. I'm always looking for new cool mods to take a look at, so let me know. And if you yourself are a mod author and have ideas for mods, we've had a couple people post their ideas for cool mods or things that they were looking to do, and I think that people have gotten great feedback in the comments from the community at large. You know, my commenters on by and large are very smart and engaged and can give you awesome feedback as to whether your idea is going to work. So this is a good place to take a look if you are trying to come up with awesome mod ideas for yourself. As always, of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 mod roundups. We'll keep doing these in future because I'm enjoying them and just checking out mods is really fun, and Baldur's Gate 3 strategic analysis, as well as other strategy game content. Cheers, my friends, and I will catch you next time.